My next guest is Dr. Laurie Barron. She is the superintendent of the Evergreen School District in Kalispell, Montana, and was named the 2021 Montana Superintendent of the Year. She has been a high school English teacher and coach, a middle school assistant principal, a middle school principal, and a part-time assistant professor. A national board certified teacher, she was the 2012 Georgia Principal of the Year and the 2013 MetLife NASSP National Middle Level Principal of the Year. Barron is co-author of the books What Parents Need to Know About Common Core and Other College and Career Ready Standards and Middle School, A Place to Belong and Become, and has authored numerous articles. She is also a speaker who provides motivation and professional learning to teachers and administrators throughout the United States. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here.
So I learned about your work because I went to a workshop at AMLE this past November, and we'll talk about that work. But we'll start off with the question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Interestingly enough, it's a little bit connected to AMLE. So I was a high school English teacher, as you noted, and I became a middle school assistant principal somewhat unwillingly. I had applied. They assured me, hey, it takes forever to get one of these jobs. I didn't think I was going to get it. And all of a sudden I was moving to middle school and I had applied for a high school administrator job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a middle school assistant principal for 2 years and still pretty uncomfortable in that role. I joined AMLE at the time, it was National Middle School Association, and had some support there and from our leadership associations, but my heart was really in high school. And so I was really struggling in finding my place. And at the end of my second year as an administrator, as an assistant principal to middle school, I got a call over to the superintendent's office, and the quick version is I got moved to a middle school across town. Remember, I was trying to get to high school, right? And I got moved to another middle school as the principal. And I was terrified. I didn't want that job. I was right before I was introduced to the staff. My associate superintendent kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, before we introduce you, you're about to be the fourth principal in 5 years in a building that was opened 5 years earlier. What? And he said, and we asked everybody what they were looking for in a principal because they were about to have their fourth principal in 5 years. And they said they wanted an older man with no children. And I literally, Dana, I waddled myself to the podium, 30 years old and 7 months pregnant. And it was very stressful for me. It was a very challenging time in my career. I didn't want to be the principal. I didn't want to be in middle school. I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no clue about improvement plans and data. And at the end of that first year, when my principal, my associate superintendent, same guy, asked me, he was doing my evaluation. He said, so Laurie, tell me about your data dives. I said, data dive? What are you talking about? He said, your school improvement plan. I said, I don't have a school improvement plan. I mean, I had no clue, which people would laugh now saying that. I said, the only diving I have been doing is over tables at lunch to break up fights. What are you talking about? Of course, I had a big change of heart. We had an incredible staff, and it was like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, we're going to get in there and turn this place around. We really had a struggling situation with some kids not finding success, and just very, very challenging. And 6 years later, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 7 years later, I was still the principal of that school, and my heart changed tremendously. And I just found a love for middle school. And we were named one of the top 5 middle schools in the country for high turnaround and high poverty schools by NASSP. And so it's work that it reminded me that sometimes it's not just the skills and the knowledge, it's the disposition and the passion and the heart to desire to do better, even when you think you don't know how. And I think that desire and working with a team that was really talented and really skilled and flexible and willing to take risk, it was some of the greatest work I was able to participate in my career.
Yeah. And even though you were very resistant to going into that school, right? You learned that the staff were there to work alongside you and make that turnaround school. And evidently it was meant to be, because you were that principal who helped the school after those ones who failed, right? So
it was super incredible. And it's interesting, the principals before me were most of them were actually the opposite. They were so successful. They were there 1 year, couldn't get anything going, and they got promoted. They were
Oh.
strong, successful leaders who they wanted them somewhere else in the district, and there was never time to embed improvement strategies. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, those first couple of years, the staff mentored and coached me, I think, far more than I did them. And I was,
Mm-hmm.
one of the youngest on staff, and certainly lacked maturity and judgment
Mm-hmm.
and discretion and decision making. I mean, I just had all kinds of stuff going on that I just didn't understand. And
Sure.
as I grew up and matured and learned and worked alongside a really talented team, man, it was incredible helping change trajectories for kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So after you'd been there, you ended up moving to Montana, which was quite a difference in pace. And now you're in Kalispell as a superintendent. So tell me how that opportunity came along.
Yeah, that was I think I've had a lot of opportunities of being in the right place at the right time. This was, I think, my mom's final gift to me. We
Mm-hmm.
had vacationed in this Flathead Valley, the northwest area of Montana, where Glacier National Park and Whitefish Mountain Ski Resort are,
Mm-hmm.
and for a number of years. And we'd always planned to retire here, which ironically enough, I would have just retired this last June. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been here 12 years now. And
Mm-hmm.
so we kept looking and knew we would retire here. And in March of 2013, I lost my mother after a very
Mm-hmm.
challenging battle with cancer. And her last advice to me was, and she was 3 months to the day away from turning 65 and retiring.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the fortune to have one of those final conversations with someone who's so meaningful in your life. And she said, "What if you don't get to retire?
Mm-hmm.
Don't wait. You need to go to Montana." I was like, "Montana's not coming after me." She said, "You
Yeah.
need to go after Montana."
Mm-hmm.
And my mother passed away a few days after that conversation. And 2 days after her funeral, my husband called me and said, "You're not going to believe this. There's a superintendent's job open in Evergreen in Montana." I was like, "Where's what? I can't be a superintendent. And where is that?"
Yeah.
And it turns out Evergreen is in Kalispell, in our dream location to live. And I was like, I'm a principal. I can't be a superintendent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thankfully, my husband kept pushing. And I think my mom's final blessing to me was to have the opportunity to come out and interview for this job. And I'm in year 12. And so
Mm-hmm.
I get to do the work I love with the people I love and the place I love. And so I feel really, really blessed to have had this opportunity. I know a lot of people don't have that
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. And so I'm very, very grateful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like that was just kind of like you said, your mom's gift at the end of her life to encourage you with that. So the workshop I went to was on scheduling. And so you've been doing webinars and workshops with AMLE. Talk to me about how this case study got started with other co-presenters and schools that are schools of distinction, as AMLE calls them, and how you decided to present some of the evidence in the workshop.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, how sometimes you don't know something is working until it's over. And then you look back and go, "Oh my goodness, that's what we did. That's
Mm-hmm.
what worked." That's kind of where I was when I was a middle school principal and we had the fortune of really turning things around for our school and our kids. Once we've gotten, and you never get there, that, but
Yeah.
once things had dramatically improved, the data showed that too. And so
Yeah.
all of a sudden people were calling and, "Hey, what are you doing? And what's happened in your school that you were able to change things for kids?" And um, it, we started looking at it. We were like, what, we've
Mm-hmm.
done so many things. Sometimes it's just like throwing stuff and hoping something sticks, and you're not really sure which thing worked.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I kept going back to was our middle school master schedule, which, oh my goodness, I have been involved in a middle school for 23 of my 29 years in education.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet
Mm-hmm.
I've had 18 different schedules. It's
Mm-hmm.
very hard. And what we really started realizing is what you do with that master schedule has a significant impact on
Mm-hmm.
so many things, culture being one
Mm-hmm.
of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Happy people or do a better job, and access to intervention and access to enrichment, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Knowing what a kid needs, a good master schedule. If it's a good master schedule, it's a good master schedule for every kid, not most
Yeah.
kids, and then you fill kids in, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we realized what a powerful thing that was, I started sharing, "Hey, here's one of the things we first did." And we
Mhm.
changed our master schedule a number of times before we got to something we believed in and that we thought really worked, and then we stuck with that. And so I had
Mhm.
the option for a number of years after that to share about master scheduling and how powerful the master schedule is in impacting so many other things in your school. And you know
Mhm.
how it is. Once you have a master schedule, it's really hard to change it until the next year,
Sure, sure.
right? You might move a section or a teacher if you have too many kids or too few kids, right? When
Mhm.
school starts, but you don't just redo the master schedule. Once you're in a master schedule, you're in it for
Mhm.
a whole year. And
Yeah.
so you spend that year thinking, oh my goodness, I'm doing this differently next year.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then had the opportunity now as a superintendent, we have a new principal this year in our middle school for the first time in a number of years. And she's looking at the master schedule that she inherited that has a lot of great parts to it that our former
Mhm.
principal did. And she's looking at opportunities for new stuff. So she and I started talking. And I
Yeah.
said, hey, turns out I got some background in that. And then started sharing that with AMLE, and then realized there were these schools of distinctions out there that had some really creative, high quality, flexible, unique master schedules. And I was just intrigued by them, right? Because
Mhm.
I had finally found the master schedule that worked for us when I was
Mhm.
principal. It took me a number of years. And then you sometimes get tunnel vision and think that's the master schedule. And then
Mhm.
when I
Mhm.
started realizing I had colleagues across the country who had high success with different types of schedules, it was just really intriguing to me to say,
Mhm.
you know what matters are certain components of a master schedule and how the
Mhm.
master schedule, not the master schedule itself. We could
Yeah.
have two totally different master schedules and they be equally effective. What
Yeah.
matters is how we develop it, why we
Mhm.
develop it, what we include in it, right? And I just became very intrigued in hearing what other people were doing. And I ended up kind of informally collecting some stories that became case studies. And now I've really enjoyed being able to share my own background and experience with successful master scheduling. And I have other examples that for some other school might be better than the one I'm sharing. And so it's been exciting to be a part of that,
Mhm.
be able to continue to learn and grow
Mhm.
my own, and how we can continue to use some of that information possibly in our own district, and be able to share some of the successes and many failures I had in
Mhm.
the master schedule.
Yeah, and like you said in the show notes, it's like it's not a one size fits all, and there's a lot of trial and error,
Mhm.
right? You said that you had 7 different master schedules in the 11 years you were a middle school administrator. So it's really the type of schedule that did work that you used for 4 years. What type of schedule was that?
So still one of my favorites. And again, you can't just replicate it. It has
Yeah.
to work, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
for us, we had a large enough student population to do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that really is a huge piece of the type of master schedule you can have, because your staffing, which is your best and most prized resource.
Mm-hmm.
You work with the number of people you have, and what you can offer in a schedule is often determined by the number of people you have. And
Mm-hmm.
so what ended up working for us after many tries was I'll call it a modified block. So
Mm-hmm.
our students took 4 75-minute core classes, if you will. So they
Mm-hmm.
have 75 minutes for English language arts, math, science, and social studies, and then 2 45-minute periods for electives, connections, specials, whatever you may call them. And in those 45 minutes, those 2 45 minutes were back to back. That was the teacher's 90-minute planning. So that
Mm-hmm.
the core teacher taught 4 75 minutes and had a
Mm-hmm.
90-minute planning. And then our connections teachers taught 6 45 minutes and still had a
Mm-hmm.
90-minute planning. And during those students' connections times, they had time for even all the different traditional elective opportunities, PE, art,
Mm-hmm.
foreign language, technology, all those different things, keyboarding. But we also offered additional math and reading support if a student was in a circumstance with like tier 2,
Mm-hmm.
tier 3, where they needed additional. But one of
Okay.
the powerful things of that schedule is because the core class was 75 minutes
Mm-hmm.
every single day, year long, right? So much more of that pre-teaching and reteaching so that a student could redo could take
Mm-hmm.
place in that class. So you need fewer of those extra intervention or enrichment classes because so
Mm-hmm.
much more can be done in the actual class. You decrease
Mm-hmm.
transitions for kids, you increase, this teacher has fewer students that he or she's working with for the whole day. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
You've got the expert in the content, and if it's a co-teach class, you've got the expert in the strategies in there for longer periods of time. And so that's one, if you have a large enough student population and therefore a large enough number of staff, that was one of my favorites, that it's what we stuck with after we finally found it.
What would the size of school that you would recommend do that type of schedule? Because I've been at schools that have used that, but like 1,000+ students or so?
I used it from 750 to 1,050.
Okay.
I think when you get below about 650, 600, it's harder to use. So it's not impossible to use. Right? It's just harder to use. So I really encourage fewer sections, right? My favorite schedule is the 6 periods. I think when you get to 7 and 8 and you can be successful with them, I have seen 7th period days work really well, right? But when you can decrease the number of sections or periods a student has in the day, you decrease transitions, you decrease the amount of stuff they got to keep up with. You know, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, the executive functioning isn't fully there, and then we're asking them to go to 8 classes every day. Oh my goodness. Right? I could barely keep up with the prep for that if I'm the teacher, right? So I think that fewer classes, that's what's enticing to me about that block too. I've also another one I've seen I haven't done, but in gathering these case studies, that's really unique to me. A colleague does for lack of a better word, alternating block.
Okay.
Like Mondays and Wednesdays, they have 3 classes, and then or 2 classes, and then Tuesday and Thursday they have the other ones, and then on Friday they have all 6 or 7.
Okay.
And so the kids only have to go to 2 or 3 classes a day. You're limiting transitions, and there's deep time for reteach and pre-teach. And of course, it takes teachers being ready to have students for longer periods of time, right? It can't just be the same lessons crunched into shorter time, right? Longer time. But that one's really intriguing to me too, because I think anytime we can limit those transitions and the amount of information and stuff and schedules that our young adolescents are responsible for each day, I think we increase the likelihood of success.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point. You're saying limiting transitions for the kids. And when you talk about leadership team, or if you have an instructional leadership team and teacher planning team, when would you suggest that they start with the master schedule planning? And teachers don't always get the planning period that they choose. So what are things that we should take into consideration when you start planning?
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to do, obviously, is decide that bell schedule. How many class periods am I going to have? How long are they going to be? Am I going to do block scheduling so I can pre-teach and reteach? Am I going to do traditional scheduling? How many sections do I need in math? How many sections do I need in 8th grade science, right? All of that. And then, the next thing I really encourage schools, if you can, and sometimes you can't, if you have a very small school and you have one teacher who can teach 6th grade, she's teaching 6th grade, right? But if you have a larger staff and you have the opportunity, really considering teacher preferences. And it doesn't mean you can honor every one of them. It doesn't mean you can do it every year. It may change year to year, but anytime you can include teachers in that process, if there is a preference and it's reasonable and it's doable and it's fair, and fair doesn't mean equal, why wouldn't you, right? So I think it's really important to try to consider teacher preferences when you're making that schedule. And then once you've done that, my core belief is once you have that skeleton, how many periods, how many minutes, how many sections you need of each thing, and you've considered teacher requests. So now you have every section and who's teaching it. You just have no kids in it, right? You've got that skeletal schedule. What I really emphasize and spend a lot of time when I do a workshop on is scheduling all special education sections and students first. So many times in a master schedule, we make a great master schedule and then we're trying to fit unique needs in at the end. And I start with unique needs at the beginning, because then we know it's a good schedule for all kids and we're not just trying to fit somebody in. And so I spend a lot of time in that on my workshops about that. And then we go and look at math classes and we schedule math classes for everybody next. And then we look at singleton classes, right? And then we can schedule everything else. And so it's pretty methodical, but in my experience, it's worked well.
Yeah. And not forgetting also the collaborative planning time as well, but that kind of comes after all these other components
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Yep, and making sure, when you're considering that schedule and teacher preferences, if
Mhm.
you're doing things like, I mean, it's pretty powerful, right? To have common planning time for your sixth grade teachers because you're all teaching the same kids. And
Mhm.
if I see, oh my goodness, Dana's having a problem in my class, and I go to talk to them, and they're like, she's having one in my class too. Oh my goodness, my class too. Let's get together and work to help instead of us being in silos and not understanding. And so considering that collaborative planning time is really powerful. And I think sometimes it's very frustrating for anyone involved in master scheduling when something doesn't happen that we know should, right? We make a master schedule and it doesn't have common planning time. Let's
Mhm.
just say.
Mhm.
And it's not because we don't think it's needed. It's not because we forgot. It's we
Mhm.
couldn't make it work.
Sure.
We got to
Sure.
remember that we got to focus on outcome more than structure, right?
Mhm.
So if
Mhm.
you couldn't get common planning time in there, what we want is the outcome of common planning time that everybody knows to
Mhm.
help Dana. Right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we still have to find a way if we don't have that common planning time. That doesn't mean we don't discuss common concerns for kids. We got to find it. Maybe we agree to eat lunch together. And I'm not telling
Yeah.
teachers to work on their lunch. I'm not
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
saying you got to, or let's say we couldn't get advisory into the schedule. We tried,
Mhm.
we could do it.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean you can't have advisory during the beginning of first period every day. Right?
Yeah,
So
that
just because
works.
you can't get something in structure, maybe we can't get
Mhm.
block in there. So we don't have as
Mhm.
much time to pre-teach and reteach.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean we
Mhm.
don't pre-teach and reteach just because we don't have a block. So we've got to get where we're not so hung
Yeah.
up on structure and we're more hung
Mhm.
up on outcome.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's a good point. Where can people read more about this and also connect with you and find out more about master scheduling and maybe have you speak at their district?
Yeah, so AMLE has a ton of resources for master scheduling. A colleague of mine, wrote a book. Ann McCarty Perez wrote the Successful Middle School Schedule that AMLE puts out that I would recommend.
Mhm.
Also, there are several articles and videos on the AMLE website from different
Mhm.
colleagues, particularly a number of them from AMLE Schools of Distinction that share their master schedule, so you can look there. Uh,
Mhm.
I kind of, like I said, I've been grabbing all these examples and case studies and putting it with my experience and sharing. And then, of course, anyone can always reach out to me. My email is Laurie Barron 18 at gmail.com. Laurie Barron 18 at gmail.com. And I'm happy to share with people. I think you got to remember flexibility, right? You
Mhm.
can't just model, you can't just replicate what you saw somewhere else and expect the same results. You got to be flexible. And so that's why I go at those key things. Make sure you're considering these when you master schedule, no matter what kind of master schedule you have.
Mhm.
I have opinions and preferences based on my
Mhm.
experiences, but I've seen other ones work well too.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure hearing more about master scheduling, and people can go to AMLE and join some of the webinars as well.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. It's exciting to always be able to share. And, when you get to share, you keep growing yourself too. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.